So you've done thousands of interviews, over these 55 years or so of your recording career. Is there any question you've been asked way too many times?
Um, no, not really. I mean, there probably is, but I, if there is, I didn't really hold on to it. So I don't. I think you can ask anything you want without fear of being, too much like someone else.
Well, okay, then questions about lions and rocket launchers then.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would lion. Yeah, those would almost qualify, I guess. It depends on the question,
So
but yeah.
you said, or at least you've been quoted as saying, that you're not playing If I Had a Rocket Launcher these days because it's the wrong time for that song. Is that, it's not on your set list. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yeah, I mean, I don't regret the song or anything like that, but uh, and the song was an expression of uh, the feelings I had at a place and time, a particular place and time. Um, and what I find in the current climate, and this started a few years ago, really, is that, especially in the U.S., is that there's just too much of a tendency for people to cheer the last line of the song, "Some son of a bitch would die." Uh, People should be shocked and horrified by that, not cheering it. And I'm not willing to play into that sentiment. So, I mean, I have played it. The last time I played it, maybe, um, was in Chicago a couple of years ago, and the audience there noticeably responded with the appropriate feelings. I don't know about shock because people were familiar with the song, but at least there was no cheering and no kind of yeah. So um, I remember thanking the audience for that lack of response, and I was so struck by it that it was like, yeah, there's no, this is it's wrong. I mean, if the song wasn't intended to produce that response, it's not about killing people really. I mean, it's about people being killed and the feelings that result from that. But it's not about, it's not an exhortation to go out there and blow away Guatemalan soldiers, and or in the current uh, political climate, Russian soldiers or Hamas or whoever. I mean, uh, it's a cry of horror, actually, the whole song. So
The contagion of violence, how...
yeah, yeah, it's how easy is it to get that feeling, to be there. I mean, I can really empathize with everybody on every side of these things. Maybe less so people that volunteer to fight on the Russian side in Ukraine, but it's still it the sense of outrage and the sense of like the kind of personal rage that we all grow up with. It's easy it finds an easy avenue of expression in situations where violence is the prevailing element. So it's easy to get work yourself up into an outraged state and uh, or not even. I mean, in the case of If I Had a Rocket Launcher, I wasn't aware of working myself up. I was just so horrified by the stuff I was hearing and the contrast between the stories that these Guatemalan refugees were telling and the condition in which I found them, which very desperate, was just more than I could deal with. But really, what the song is expressing is every kind of rage and every kind of outrage. I mean, so it all gets channeled into that focal point, and um, so the, I, there's a value to paying attention to that. But the chief value of paying attention to it is so you can avoid doing it. And I don't want to encourage people to do that now, especially because there's enough of that going around.
Related to that sentiment, What responsibility does an artist have to the ways that their work is interpreted or received by the audience, or is there any responsibility in there?
I think the artist has some degree of responsibility. I think the responsibility is to, well, the general responsibility is to do what you're doing well and make it as clear as you can, so there's, as unambiguous as you can, unless ambiguity, of course, is the point. But in a case like of a song like this, that isn't the point, and so you try to just say what needs to be said in the best way you can. And but I think I feel a responsibility, which, I mean, the answer to the previous question will kind of indicate that to not encourage that sort of what's the word, jingoistic response to a song like that. I think it's my job to say what I feel needs to be said, but that doesn't absolve me of responsibility for the effect it has on people. And if people misinterpret it or makes construct something new out of it that I didn't intend, then maybe that's not so much my responsibility. But that last bit, but certainly you can't separate yourself from the effect that you have. At the same time as saying that, you also can't really know the effect you're having until someone tells you, right? So if I sing a song like that in front of an audience and the audience cheers inappropriately, then that's an indicator that there's an issue. Otherwise, I have to wait till somebody tells me how a song affected them. And sometimes that effect is the result of a gross misinterpretation, and most of the time it isn't. Most of the time it's something but genuine, but sometimes very unexpected.
Typically, Bruce, you've answered the next 3 questions.
I'm not Mr. Soundbite. I do go on.
Good thing. It's good. Your manager of the last 55 years or so, Bernie Finkelstein, he said about writing songs, thematic songs or songs with thematic weight, that it's quote, easy to write a bad song about war, right? Which makes your catalog all the more impressive because you've written so many really wonderful songs about the effects of war and other social issues. But you kind of touched on this. How do you tread that line between propaganda and art? Like I said before you arrived, we were talking about if a tree falls, and I said that song should be unbearable because it's spoken word, it's a lot of facts, and yet it's groovy and it's fun, So
well, that's the trick, isn't it? But I think take a horrible thing and make it groovy and fun. Yeah. I mean, songs. I've fooled around with the song form. You mentioned the spoken word songs, and If a Tree Falls is one of the perhaps more. That's one of the poppier efforts in that direction that I've put out. But because of the nature of the music and whatnot. But a song like Chariot of Night, for instance, it doesn't do that. It's got pretty music, but it just it tells a story. But it's maybe a little more challenging. There's nothing to tap your foot to, and and etc. But I don't know. It's hard to articulate properly what that is. What isn't hard to articulate is the issue of propaganda versus a position that's taken. Let's say the position. To me, propaganda is sort of it's by definition made up. You're selling a point of view. It's just basically it's you might as well be writing a commercial. and it doesn't. You can have propaganda about very worthy things, but they still come out like commercials. So the trick is to be truthful and speak from your own experience as you've understood it. I mean, some of what ends up in my songs is other people's experience distilled through me, but there has to be an element of truth and of the genuine about it before for it to be art, I think. I don't. I mean, you can get bogged down in all the theory and stuff, but because really writing a song doesn't involve that much speculation about the value of it and the meaning of it. It's kind of like I have an idea and I'm going to work with it, but in the big picture, I think that distinction is pretty important. I mean, if I listen to far more pop radio than I like to, because of my young daughter, who is a big Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran fan, and I mean, you don't get Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran are both capable of writing really good songs and of making really good records, but what you hear of them on the radio is not their best side, in my view, and my daughter thinks so too. Actually, she's 12. She's got pretty good taste, but what with the radio on in the car, and then in addition to Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran, you're also getting all this stuff that, in a way, the cumulative effect of it is to add up to propaganda, of a sort, because it's all about sex and dancing and
lifestyle.
And well, not just light, but ignorant, like kind of willful ignorance. It's like I mean, there's exceptions. There's like this is a thing about killing her ex. It's hilarious. It's actually really good. And there's a few of these things that leak through, but they're the exception. And so in the main, what you get is, I basically just I want to have sex with you, and if I have to only dance with you, that'll do too, basically. But it's all aimed it's aimed at young people, and the cumulative effect. And I think it was probably always true. Probably was true when I was listening to Elvis Presley at that age.
Yes, you're probably at least, yeah.
Well, I'm sure I don't think they thought it was propaganda, but they thought it was scandalous and kind of scary. But yeah, I mean, when you think that I mean, back in that era, like 100 years ago, you didn't get the same. The sort of wallpaper effect that you get now from media in general, like where everything is just everywhere, coming at you all the time. You can't go in a store. Back then, you could walk into a store and there was never music playing. You could sit in a restaurant and they weren't playing music, or if they were, it was sort of specific to whatever the restaurant was about. Now it's like that wallpaper kind of mash of it kind of, it's not even innocuous, because a lot of it actually, if you think about what the lyrics are actually saying, is kind of offensive.
And we have less agency
but we're not invited to pay attention to that aspect of it. So you're just surrounded by it and it's coming at you all the time. So into how much that seeps in, how much it affects one's understanding of the world, I don't know, but I don't feel like it affects me very much, other than to kind of turn me off. But I wonder about the young kids.
Yeah. I'm going to change topics a little bit. I wanted to ask you, because I've never asked you this, how would you explain, or what is the how important is Bernie Finkelstein to the development of the Canadian music industry, do you think?
Bernie's probably listening. I better be careful. Um, yeah. um, well, he's. I think Bernie's had a huge effect. Uh, not by himself. I mean, there's been others too, but Bernie's part of the original movement that created the Canadian music scene as we know it. And you know, there's probably half a dozen players in the group of which he's a part. In that sense, so yeah, he's had a huge effect.
I'm going to ask you two more and then turn it over to the audience for a bit, and then I have a couple more for you. After you write a song, do you feel changed? Does the writing of the song transform you in any way? Or do you get a feeling of like renewal or anything like that after you finish writing? After a song comes together, I guess, put it that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's definitely a feeling. I'm not sure if it's that, if I'd use those words to describe it. I feel happy when I think that I've got a song that's working. It's exciting, and there's this little inner thrill that goes with that. And um, you know, that lasts for a while. It lasts, you know, it might last days. It doesn't last for years. But yeah, it's like the thrill of the hunt, and then you catch what you are after, and that feels satisfying and also exciting. And then there's a bit of suspense, of course, because you don't know how anybody else who hears it is going to react to it. So you know, it's kind of like that.
When the last time I interviewed you for the book was June 2021. Your latest album, "O Sun, O Moon," is just awesome. I don't know if I've actually said that to you. It's a beautiful album. How many people have heard the album? Yeah. So that was a smattering. Go home and listen to it. So we spoke. Those songs were written between 2020 and 2021, over 2 years it seems, or so. We spoke in June 21, and it was really informative to me, at least. Frustrating for you, I think, because you were expressing what a lot of writers feel, like this silence between songs. And this is just before you went to Hawaii, and I think wrote 3 or 4 more, and then recorded the album after that, I think. But it was really instructive to hear you say. You said something like, "Well, they're not coming at a roaring pace," and it was like the sense you were giving was that it's all over. So, do you feel that way after you finish writing a sequence of songs, that there may be no more songs?
Not exactly. I definitely don't take it for granted. I mean, it could stop anytime, and it always could have. Because I don't feel like I'm in control really of the certainly not of the pace at which songs come, and not of the content even really, because it's of the way I write. It's kind of waiting for the flash of inspiration or whatever, and you know, you just don't know. That flash may never come again, and at this point, I'm old enough that it doesn't matter too much to me if it does or not. But I'm very happy when it does, and I was really happy to get the bunch of songs that ended up on "O Sun, O Moon."
Have you written any new ones since "O Sun, O Moon"?
Yeah. Sorry, did I miss something?
Oh, okay. I asked, do you have any new songs since that?
Since no, I didn't hear that question. Sorry. No, I don't actually.
So we're still waiting.
But I'm okay with that because I've been doing so many shows over the last year and a half or whatever, that it's really great to be playing these new songs, and I'm quite happy to have those be the new things.
Oh, yeah. Is it okay if I turn it to the audience? There's a few people have questions for you.
By all means, yeah.
So we'll go with Elizabeth here. She's been patient. Pretty close to it.
Okay. When I'm grocery shopping, I'm of an age where my rebel music is now Muzak playing while I'm picking out my chicken breasts. But I have never, ever heard one of your songs in that soundtrack. How do you feel about that?
Well, actually, I have. In similar context, I've actually heard Wondering Where the Lions Are, and I've heard Love is in a Dangerous Time in various odd places, and not frequently. So, yeah, your experience is probably more typical than mine. But how do I feel about it? About the fact that my songs aren't Muzak? I feel just fine. Of course, it'd be nice if they were so famous that people couldn't resist playing them. So, somewhere in there's some sort of balance, I guess.
Muzak, the sound of the slow collapse, right? We have another question here from Robin McIntyre of Blackfly Jam.
Thanks, Mark. Hey, it's so great to see you looking good and smiling. I mean, we've all been around 55 years, and I've watched you for a long time on stage, fighting with audiences really to get them to listen. And I'm concerned in a way by your popularity and your amazing catalog of music. I see your songs. We've had a very appropriate conversation about wallpaper music versus polished gems, which is what I think you put out. And I come to that conclusion because you very rarely deconstruct a song and play it any differently than when you've first presented it to us, at least in public. And the idea of you playing to huge audiences and having to tailor your set list really to the audience so that you're playing basically to the common denominator of people that want to feel good, that I find that difficult. So are you actively seeking out your audiences is my first question. And my second question is, do you ever go back to songs and deconstruct them and try to play them a different way? And do you do that in public?
Well, the answer is going to be a little more complicated than the question. I don't seek out my any specific audience. I think by definition the songs are going to attract people who like to think about their entertainment. I mean, you can watch NCIS and it'll entertain you, and you don't have to think at all, which I do from time to time. But if you, I prefer to be entertained by something that asks something of me, and that's what I offer people in my songs. So that's going to create a kind of self-limitation in terms of the audience. But as to the second part of the question, that changing the songs, I've had to change the guitar parts of some songs recently because of my arthritic hands that won't make certain shapes on the guitar very well anymore. So there's a song like Pacing the Cage, for instance, I can't play right now because, I mean, I can play it, but it's crap because my left hand won't make the chord shapes. That was also true of All the Diamonds in the World and Lord of the Starfields. And I've reworked the guitar parts in those songs so that I can play them. I just haven't figured out how to do it with Pacing the Cage yet. So in that sense, yeah, there are reworkings of the songs, but really it's not. That's out of necessity. What I don't change in the songs, well, I think there's When You Give It Away, there's a reference to Prince Charles that I'm now saying as King Charles. So, but that's about the extent of my lyric revision. So I kind of write the songs to be what they are, and if they outlive their relevancy, then I just don't sing them.
once again, you answered a question that I was going to ask you about your guitar playing and the adaptations you've done in recent years. Can you hear?
I'm not hearing. If there's something being said, I don't hear it.
How's that?
There, yeah.
Okay, good. So you've answered again, and anticipated the next question, or one of the next questions. In adapting to arthritis, your style has changed. Like you're talking about adapting older material, but like listening to Crowing Ignites, double album of beautiful acoustic instrumentals, you've really developed a new style. Like, has adapting to the condition or just the loss of mobility brought new possibilities to the instrument that you hadn't occurred to you before?
Maybe. What it has done is forced me to find ways to play. I mean, it's not that dire. The songs I mentioned are sort of the only ones that I haven't been able to play without reworking them. But the new stuff, of course, is accommodating the condition of my hands now. So, you know, it's not really a conscious thing. I mean, it just obviously that is going to affect what choices I make and where my fingers want to go on the guitar, because they're going to want to go to the easy places.
Right. Colin Lyndon, your current producer, and many people here know Colin Lyndon. He's performed not too long ago for Black Fly Jam here. He said when people ask him that question about your adaptation to arthritis and the change in your playing, he says, yeah, and he's still the greatest guitar player in the world. That's Colin Lyndon saying that. So, like, you've known Colin since he was like 14 or something like that, like, and he credits you with getting him started as a finger picker. Did you know that?
Well, you mentioned that in the book, and or at least you quote him as saying something like that in the book. I did not know that actually until I read it. But we used to run into each other first at the Mariposa Festival. That's where I first met him. As far as I remember, anyway. But then we used to run into each other on the street in Toronto. It's in the 80s, fairly often. And you know, it was always an enjoyable encounter, whatever. So, but no, Colin's a terrific guitar player, and I mean the world is full of great guitar players. Actually, there's tens of thousands of great guitar players. You know,
at the 10-minute notice. I don't know what happens in 10 minutes, but something's going to cut off. We can do it again. Do you have any advice for artists in maintaining a practice and growing in a practice over decades?
Well, I mean, I think practicing is important. I don't know if it's important to everyone. It is to me. And I think it depends on how much you want your instrument, which includes your voice, by the way, to be effective musically, or I mean, well, that's not quite the right way to say it. How much importance you want to put on you know, your guitar versus your voice or whatever. If you're just playing simple songs with simple chords, you probably don't need to practice all that much, just enough to keep up, you know, the musculature used to play those chords. But if you're interested in expanding your horizons and you want to be able to play more than what you already know how to play, then you have to practice. And ideally, you'd be spending at least a couple of hours a day on it. I fall very far short of the ideal these days. In the past, it's been better. I've been more disciplined about it, but there's a lot of distractions. But you've
also put in thousands and thousands of hours, you know, over decades. So you can probably afford to float a couple of weeks there and there.
Yeah, well, but you know, at this point, it wasn't as true when I was younger. But now, you know, if I don't play for a week, it's going to take me a week to get it back. a week of practicing to get my fingers to do what they did before I stopped practicing. So I got to kind of stay on it for that reason. But um, I mean, there is an element. It's a small part of your body, but your hands, using your muscles in your hands is an athletic exercise, just like somebody doing the hammer throw uses their whole body. So you've got to keep the muscles in shape, and keep the hand-eye coordination in shape. So I mean, again, it depends on what you're doing, and the same thing applies to your voice. It's all muscles that control the use of your voice. So some people are gifted with a naturally great voice, and they can sing effortlessly. That's not my situation, so I got to practice that too.
Many artists will almost deliberately sabotage their lives, to have things to write about, or fall into that, the tortured artist trope. Have you any thoughts about that? That the artist idea?
Yeah. I think you can make too much out of it. I don't like to make judgments on behalf of other people, because you walk the road you're on. But for me, I don't feel any need to seek out difficulty or controversy or pain. Life has plenty of it, just being around. So it's about the perspective on that stuff, I guess. I mean, you run out of ideas. I think I'll go have an affair, so I'll have something to write about. I mean, that's a bad idea. In my
That's good advice. So you have a young daughter. You said she's 12. Tell us something about the next generation that gives you hope.
Oh boy. What I hope is that they withstand all the crap they're exposed to. And I'm not sure they will, but I feel the odd pang about the fact that I've been responsible for bringing this kid into the world who's going to grow up with the kind of stuff that my generation is handing on to hers. But the world is, I mean, I remember my dad saying to me sometime in the early '60s, where we were all into ban the bomb and everybody's worried about nuclear war, and we, in public school we had air raid drills where we got under our desk in case the Russians sent rockets. But and my dad said, he was born in 1918, and he said after the First World War, everybody felt like if there was another world war, it would be the end of the world. And we had another war, and here we are, right? So that's not much to cling to, but it's illustrative of the fact that we shouldn't get completely bowled over by this stuff, by how insurmountable the odds seem to be that we're confronted with. And I mean, we in North America are sheltered from a lot of the worst of what's going on in the world. We won't always be, I don't think. And so, I worry about that, because, what happens when Canada's confronted with what Ukraine is confronted with now, for instance, right? How do we deal with that? Well, I won't be around to do it, but my daughter might be, and so I mean, that's extremely worrisome, and it's hard to be hopeful about that. But that's from thinking about it. When I don't think about it, I just go around being hopeful. I can't get rid of it. So I guess that's the hope springing eternal in the human breast, or whatever it is, the human beast. But anyway, but the future aspects of the future look very dire, but we have this capacity to continue in us as a species, and we can hope that aspect of us will prevail.
We may be cut off in just a few minutes. Would it be okay if we called you back for another, say, 15 after that?
Yeah, my iPad battery's getting low, but yeah, that's not a problem anyway.
A couple of fun, silly questions for you, and then maybe someone else wants to ask something. If you could see any musician of any era, any time, live, you have a time machine, I guess, who would you see? Who would you want to see perform?
Oh, wow. The guy that invented the first stringed instrument.
Ooh. Some archer out there. Cool. So, two-part question. Extraterrestrials land on Earth. So you get to ask one question, and you get to tell them one thing about humanity. What would be a question, and what would you tell them? What do they need to know about us?
Yeah, well, I would ask them what their intentions were, and I would invite them to keep a certain distance while I chambered around in my 12 gauge, which is to me a typically human response. So, I mean, this is what we do, isn't it? But that's the first thing I think of. It's like, I don't know what your intentions are. If they're honorable and friendly, then let's get it on. And if they're not, then may the best one win. But I anyway, yeah, silly answer to a potential.
I thought you were going to ask them about Taylor Swift, so I'm a little.
Yeah. Have you heard? Yeah.
You've traveled the entire world. You've hiked and camped. I wouldn't say everywhere, but you've been far more places than most mortals. Have you ever camped in the Algoma District? You spent much time up around this?
Not per se. No, I mean Algonquin Park is the closest place I've actually camped. Not counting the old days when I first started traveling across Canada in 1970, there were, over the course of that summer, we had a little camp or a kind of home.
So they're just going to call them back. It'll take a few minutes. Does anyone else have a question? Okay. Okay. Did you want to ask him that, or should I ask him for you? Oh, okay. Oh, well, I can ask him for you, for sure. Yep. Any others? Okay.
sunshine, smile on me. I can smell grass growing in the field. Wind in my hair tells me how it feels. Farmhouse, silver roof flashing by. Tractor, trailer, truck says goodbye with a sigh. And I'm going to the country. Oh, la 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 la. I'm going to the country. Sunshine, smile on me. Birds singing, I'm singing in my bones. Doesn't much matter now where I'm going. Get it when I get there is what
Hello,
I'll do.
can you hear me?
If I get enough, I'll give some to you. And I'm going to the country. Oh, happy as can be.
Hey, good. Okay. I hear you. Great. Yeah.
You kind of have a sort of a Big Brother-esque presence on the big screen here.
I can back off. I can be the smaller brother. But it has to be on.
If Big Brother was George Bernard Shaw or Papa Smurf, I guess.
Yeah, I think Papa Smurf sounds good.
Hey, I've lost place here. Oh, we had some questions from the audience. So there was one question was, have you maintained your Canadian citizenship?
Yes.
There you go.
All right. Well.
Rick, I think, did you want to? Yeah.
I was just wondering if, do you like listening to yourself? That comes out wrong, but a lot of singers and songwriters are famous for not liking to listen to themselves. Like James Taylor can't stand to listen to himself. And we all have that experience when we first hear ourselves recorded, and you say, God, do I sound like that? And then later on, your ears adjust to it, and you actually hear yourself that way. But you obviously have to do it to mix the albums and do all that. But do you ever think, I'm tired of hearing myself?
I don't listen to myself as much any more than I absolutely have to. I mean, once in a while I do, and once in a while I'm surprised. I'll hear something. I'll be somewhere and I'll hear a record of mine at somebody's house or somewhere in public, and it's like, oh, that doesn't sound too bad. No, when I listen to myself, it's because I forgot a song and I need to relearn it. Generally.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Question? Oh, we have Amy Boyer in the back here. You have to get kind of close.
Okay. Andine Bruce, miigwech for broadcasting live to us here in Bawating, my homeland. I was just wondering, I have a two-part question. If you had to write a book about someone you admired, who would you write about? And if you read Mark's book?
I can't say I've read Mark. I'll answer backwards. I haven't read Mark's book thoroughly through, but I've skimmed through it and read bits and pieces here and there. And I'm actually quite struck by, and honored actually by the notion that somebody's willing to pay such close attention to what I do. That's something that is not taken for granted at all. And I think, it makes it pretty special. Some of what he has to say, I don't entirely agree with, but that's fair. I mean, it's his point of view. But who would I write about? Man, let me think for a minute about that. I don't know because I don't. I mean, there's lots of people that would be interesting to write about. Millions of them probably, if I knew their stories. But um, but I don't really have heroes. I mean, I have people who've been influential on me, either as in terms of the work that they do, or in terms of just personal advice or uh, um, shaping. But uh, but I don't really have heroes as such. So I don't know. I mean, I listened to Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin the other day, and it I was really interested in that. I mean, I've always thought of Putin as just this sort of dork, you know, and I mean, I think he is probably a horrible person, but he was very interesting on the screen in the way that he dealt with Carlson, who was also more interesting than I gave him credit for being. Uh, and yeah, it was, that made I started thinking about Russian history because of that whole, because Putin goes on and on about the history of Russia relative to Ukraine. And I don't know anything about Russian history except that it was founded by some Swedish Vikings back in the day. But that that was interesting. And so would I write about someone like Vladimir Putin? Maybe he's an interesting character, but the perspective I would have would be of no value because you know. But someone in the future could write about someone like him and probably write a really interesting book. So if I were to look back in history at what the equivalent would be, maybe you'd be writing about, well, to give Putin more credit than he probably deserves, writing about Napoleon. Let's hope Putin doesn't take it as far as Napoleon did, but I think on his own turf he has. Um, yeah, interesting question, but I don't have a very good answer for it.
And Putin would probably think that you got certain things wrong. So,
I'm sure he would.
So
I'm sure he would.
You Are My Putin.
There's a song in there somewhere.
So you've worked with half a dozen or more non-government agencies around the world, and you've worked with some, and I've had the opportunity to speak with some of the activists and social reformers you've worked with, and they are just brilliant people. Like, what did you learn from that work, or more specifically, what did you learn from those people? Think of like Susan Walsh or Mark Allen, or I'm just naming a few names.
Well, the experiences I had with them, I mean, well, Mark Allen and Susan Johnson were super helpful with respect to Central America. They were living in Nicaragua when I met them, and they both were really helpful in terms of my understanding of what I was experiencing and the context in Nicaragua and in Central America in general. Susie Walsh and I got acquainted when I first went to Nepal in 1987, I believe. And the two of us traveled around together for several weeks around the country looking at projects of what was then called USC Canada. It's now called Seed Change. And I mean, it's hard to imagine what that trip would have been like without Susie Walsh. But in addition to the specifics, working with people like that has been inspirational in terms of hope, for one thing, because in order to do the kind of work that they've done, you have to maintain some sense that it's worthwhile. And they, I haven't talked to any of them recently about this sort of thing, so I don't know what they feel now, years later. But at the time, there was a real sense that you could do something about the problems that they and their organizations were addressing, and that really made a difference for me, more than anything, probably, because I grew up kind of not thinking about it too much one way or the other originally, but when I did start thinking about it, even back in the 70s, things you could see the future looking pretty dystopian, and some of that dystopia has come to pass, and we're living in it, but not all of it. And I think the fact that it isn't worse than it is due to people like that. That kind of activists who are actually out there doing the work of making life better for somebody.
Yeah. You tend to make long-term commitments to the organizations and the causes that you represent. Like, Seed Change now, which is the United Service Committee, you've been with them for like 50 more years, right? You were involved with them when your first album came out, I think. And so how do you select what issues or what groups you'll work with? Like, what is your research process like?
It's not really research; it's circumstance, and then there's a little bit of like, well, is this worthwhile? Are these people on the up and up? And there's some of those questions get asked, but really, I mean, with what used to be a Unitarian Service Committee, that organization was founded and run for decades by a woman named Dr. Lotta Hitchmanova, who would be familiar to people of my generation from her ads on TV. She actually came to my, I think maybe grade 3 public school class and spoke. And it was a young woman in the same uniform that she wore, for decades, and spoke passionately about the situation at that time it was Greek war orphans, because the Greek Civil War was on after in the 50s. And I'd never thought about any of this stuff, but here was this young woman speaking passionately about this, and it stuck with me. When in 1970, when the first album was actually getting some radio play, and I actually got it. Excuse me, I dropped my phone there. I actually got a big check, the first sizable amount of money I'd ever seen. I thought, I got to give some of this away. So who do I give it to? And it happened that Lotta Hitchmanova was also friends with my then mother-in-law, which I didn't know prior to this. But I'm saying to Kitty, who I was married to at the time, like, what should we do with this? I can't just bank this money. I got to give some of it away. And she said, well, my mom's friends with Lotta Hitchmanova. Oh, okay. So so I gave them a donation, and that was the beginning of my association with them. And then because of that connection, that family connection, we got acquainted. And at that point, it was an ongoing acquaintance, and it seemed obvious to contribute what I could in terms of financial donations, but also in terms of doing radio spots and TV ads and so on for them, which I did for years.
Thank you. I'm running out of questions. I just wanted to say that you are embarking on, I think you'll be on the road from March until May of this year, and maybe even after that. You do a lot of shows, and they seem concentrated within, like you'll do like 3 weeks or something like that, of pretty steady shows, like daily shows. Is the road as much, I wouldn't say fun, but what is your experience touring at this age, like after these many decades, compared to when you were before? Like, has it changed for you? Is it still as much, as exciting as it was?
It's exciting, yes. And actually, I mean, the road feels more like home than home. Once I get going, I mean, it's a big hassle at this point, to get out or to get geared up and get it rolling. But once the tour is rolling, then it feels pretty good. I have to think more because of my, the arthritis we talked about before, etc. A couple of other physical issues I got to think about those, and there's a little bit more kind of fear and loathing attached to what might happen that would interfere with the tour going forward. But so far things have gone okay, and I look forward to getting on the road. I'll be glad when it stops, though. I mean, I feel like I've been pretty busy now for the last couple of years, and it actually goes from, we go to Italy March 2nd, and it ends up at the Mariposa Festival in July. And so there are breaks in there. It's not like night after night, but it's concentrated enough that I'll be glad when it stops. But I'm also really glad to be doing it.
Well, thank you again, Bruce. It's been such a pleasure and honor to have you here. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. And thanks, Mark, and thanks for writing the book. I found it very touching and interesting, actually, to get all these other people's points of view about what I've done. But all you folks at Sault Ste. Marie, I hope I get to see you in the flesh one of these days, and I will look forward to that, and blessings on you all.
It's been almost 10 years since you've been here, I think.
That's way too long.
That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, thank you so much. I'll just let everyone have another chance here. Do you have something, burning question for Mr. Cockburn before we... Oh, there is one. Okay. And so have a wonderful trip, wonderful, safe tour, Bruce.
Thanks.
The burning question I have, Bruce, is what are the top 3 artists that you're listening to right now? They don't have to be necessarily current, but what's driving your musical journey forward most?
That's interesting. I don't listen to music a lot. My ears don't like to be battered these days, but when I do, I listen to a lot of jazz, and there's certain things there's an old Charles Mingus album from the 50s called Tijuana Moods. It's a fantastic record. There's some other stuff from the 60s that Chico Hamilton, they're sort of the jazz things that I gravitate toward if I'm not just turning on the radio. But most of my music listening is in the car. When I'm by myself, I'll put on the jazz station, and San Francisco's blessed with a couple of good ones. And you never know what you're going to get, but the standards are high. In terms of songwriters, I just listened to Ani DeFranco is somebody who I have huge respect for as a writer and as a person, actually. And I hadn't listened to her for a while, but I came across an album of hers, a more recent album, the other day, and that's beautiful. So, there's not really a pattern to it. I mean, it's just kind of whatever there is. Sometimes, I've the stuff I pull up on Spotify could be blues or gospel. It could be classical stuff. I tend to like the more modern, so-called classical stuff, and the Baroque, and then I'm less fond of what's in between. But it could be anything, or Japanese flute music. I mean, it's all over the map.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you again, Bruce. Take care of yourself. It's great to see you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot, and great talking with you.
Thanks, everybody.
That was awesome.
Oh, thank you. Oh, there you are. I didn't know where you disappeared to.